The Data Crunchers team is here today at an airfield to find out just how much you can trust the latest in backup and recovery solutions.
We've set up a test of the 3 leading providers of backup solutions: Brand S, Brand C, and EMC backup and recovery solutions. The idea is to back up an identical virtualized exchange database image on each system, recover it, and see which system can do it the fastest.
But where does the trust come in? Well, that's where it gets interesting. At the same time each team starts the test, we're going to throw a priceless, historically significant artifact out of a plane with a parachute that only opens once the data is completely backed up and recovered. The Brand S team, they're using their new appliance and software.
Brand C is a software-only product, so they'll be using commodity hardware to run this test.
EMC will be using an Avamar and Data Domain backup and recovery solution, the industry's #1 integrated deduplication software and appliance. Now let's take a look at what's at risk. Brand S is risking this IBM PC that is claimed to have been owned by Bill Gates and contained the earliest known sample of the C-brain virus. Brand C is risking this vintage tape recorder that was rumored to be used in the Nixon White House. And EMC is risking this original Wang terminal from the collection of Joe Tucci when he was CEO of Wang Laboratories. So now that we know what's at risk, let's give this a try. First up, Brand C.
Go, Roger, control.
Better hurry up, guys. Ooh, that backup took 10 seconds. And the recovery? It's still going.
Okay, next up is Brand S with their new appliance.
And go, and Roger.
Come on. I don't know, it's not looking so good. Well, that didn't go so good. Let's see, 14 seconds for the backup and failed to do the recovery.
And that leaves EMC's backup and recovery solution. Ready, guys? Let's
go. Roger that.
Open.
Congratulations. The EMC solution backed up the file in 2.5 seconds and restored it in 2 seconds. And that saved Joe Tucci's precious technology artifact from the fate of these unfortunate objects. That's our Data Crunchers report.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Goulden, President and COO, EMC Corporation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to so many of us for joining us this afternoon. We have an exciting session for you today. We're pleased to have a very important set of announcements to share with you in the backup arena. And to take you right to the punchline, I'll tell you about what we're going to be announcing first, and then we'll put it all into context for you. And Guy will be taking on and doing the major lifting to explain what's happening in the actual technology itself. But let me talk to you about the announcements today. So today we're basically announcing a couple of different things. We're announcing a brand new generation of our data domain appliances. Latest technology, high performance, extensive deduplication, rapid recovery capabilities. We're also announcing a huge enhancement to our data protection suite that we'll talk about in a second that will merge together some of the more data protection oriented aspects around backup recovery and archiving. But equally importantly, what we're also announcing for our customers is a new protection storage architecture. What this protection storage architecture does is it changes the traditional backup model. What this change will let you do is treat backup, archive, and disaster recovery together. And all three of them will be provided by this common protection storage layer. And this is a real game changer. And the products we're announcing today, the new data domain systems and the EMC data protection suite, are a significant way towards enabling this protection storage architecture for our customers and our partners. This will let our customers and our partners offer data protection as a service inside their enterprises and to their customers. It is a game changer. This is a significant change in the whole landscape of the backup industry. But before we dive into those areas, let me put this into context around the EMC strategy. So as we think about what's happening in the IT marketplace, the IT industry, there's a huge transition to what we call the third platform of computing, driven by mobile, cloud, big data, social. These are huge trends in our industry. And to be successful, these have to be supported by an underlying pillar of trust. And as many of you know, EMC strategy is focused around these areas with a principal focus upon cloud, big data, and trust. And that's where EMC is playing to help our customers transform their businesses to take advantage of these trends. And I want to focus just for a second upon trust, because trust is a key part of that strategy. And trust is more than just security. People often think about trust as being a security-oriented strategy. Yes, it's that. But it's also about the continuous availability of applications, and it's also about the ability to do rapid backup, recovery, and archiving. So trust is foundational to EMC strategy, and backup recovery is a key part of trust. Now, if we talk about storage for a second, and backup exists in most cases to backup storage workloads are different. They're different, as this chart shows, based upon the performance they need, the capacity they need, and the service levels that they need. And because of this variety of workloads exist in an enterprise, this is why EMC has a family of best-of-breed primary storage platforms, all the way from our VMAX at the high end to our Atmos system for object-oriented storage. And in every single one of these categories, EMC is the market leader in primary storage. And that's what a lot of people recognize EMC as being the leader in today, in storage systems. And the data bears that out. If we look at IDC, recently taken in March of this year, shows the progression of EMC's market share growing based upon our storage platforms, getting a couple of points of market share a year, and the clear market leader in the storage marketplace. Now, what people don't realize quite as much is that we've also been making a significant investment in the backup and recovery space. And over the last 10 years, we've spent $5 billion on technology in our backup and recovery portfolio. That includes what we spent upon acquisitions and includes what we spent on research and development internally. The total is $5 billion. And as you can see, we have been an innovator and a consolidator in the backup and recovery market space. And this is what we're going to be talking to you about more today. So not only have we become the leader, or are we the leader in storage, we've also, over that point in time, become the leader in backup around our data domain, our Avamar, and our networker families. And to put this into context for you, I'll show you this in a couple of different ways. EMC has been the leader in disk-based backup. And as part of that, we have created the industry for purpose-built backup appliances. And as this chart, again, from IDC data in the fourth quarter of last year, shows that we're by far the market share leader in this category of purpose-built backup appliances, which is very important as we talk about this new architecture and how we can change the way backup is done. Being the leader in this is foundational for that going forward. We're also the leader in the overall backup marketplace. So what this chart does, again, using data from IDC, is takes the revenue of the leading backup vendors and takes their appliance revenue and their software revenue and adds them both together. And as you can see, again, on the same basis, EMC is a market leader. But it's this combination of the purpose-built backup appliance and the software we have in the space that will enable us to change the game in how backup is managed and thought about in our business. And that is the purpose of today's announcement. So said a different way, EMC is not only the market leader in primary storage, EMC is the world's largest data protection company as well. And with this as our basis, we're going to talk to you about the meat of the day and the main content. And to do that, I'm going to hand you over to Guy Churchward, the president of our Backup Recovery Systems business. Guy, thank you.
Thank you. I now feel really bad about following that. That was just way too good. So I'm Guy Churchward. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preview and a context of the releases, and then Stephen's going to follow up with some of the technical details. Stephen will say, and I'm sure on one of his first slides, is that backup is broken. You know, the better way for me to describe it would be that backup is almost like the long pole now in the IT transformational tent. It's kind of interesting. It's been a space, and I almost use the terms of the Rodney Dangerfield of technology. In other words, people have it, they have a checkbox. It's kind of ignored in the back end, but it's becoming more and more increasingly important. And if I take backwards and then I go forwards, what you really want to do is you need to scale your business. And sadly, in a lot of technology sense, when you scale your business, the complexity goes up and the cost goes up. That equation's wrong, but the tenets are exactly right. You need to look at scale, you need to look at complexity, and you need to look at the cost. So if I look at backup topology, this is kind of what it looks like. So in other words, you've got the applications going through to primary storage, off to a backup server, and then to tapes. Now, stepping back about 10 years ago, and again, David was talking about it with the PBBA space, we looked at this hard and we're trying to figure out, what's the long pole in the tent? And the long pole in the tent then was tape. So it was an area that we looked at and we said, okay, so what we need to do is to see whether we can eliminate tape. From a functionality perspective, from a restore perspective, from the fact that you can't do things like incrementals, you can't even get the data back. It's very, very difficult. So you really want to attack that market space. So we focused it. So our first mission was really around focus on tape. That led to the purpose-built backup appliance market space. So again, here's kind of the picture and the topology of it. So we kind of saw that as being fine. In other words, we marched forward. But with the onset of the amount of data that's coming at it in a sort of a tsunami fashion and the heterogeneity at the front end, it's been very difficult to now keep up with the capacity. And this is only one part of the puzzle. So looking back at it, I should say that part of the announcement that, my slide's brilliant, part of the announcement I got on the data main side is that we have these 4 new platforms. So you bust that one for me, but there you go. 4 times faster, 10 times more scalable, 38% less dollar per gigabyte. So this is on the mid-range. So we have lower systems, the top end, which was the DD990, still in place. We already refreshed that. But this is basically a whole new mid-range or mid-tier set of platforms. And 27% or 27 times, I should say, more scalable than our nearest competitor. So, a great achievement definitely on that. And we have to keep moving forward on the PBBA side. So whatever happens, that equation on the cheaper, deeper, and faster, we have to continue that march. So we have done that. And in fact, I think we have some upstairs that you can kind of touch and swoon over and take photographs of. So moving forward, that's kind of a situation we thought, well, okay, we're done. But then you have this data coming at you, and there's this rift now appearing that we're seeing between the line of business or the application owners and the IT staff. And this is kind of like, if you think about it, as moving upstream. So downstream, we've sorted this out with the PBBA. That's the tape. We want to move up. Now, upstream, you now have the backup server. And this is now becoming the bottleneck. So this has this stovepipe rigidity. It's kind of what I would classify as a me. The way in which we work, and I would say we're a big backup organization. We have technologies in this space, and part of this announcement is we are starting to disrupt ourselves, which has to happen to back up, to actually move towards the future state. So you have to have the right clients, you actually have to have the right replication, you actually have to have the policies, you have to have the servers. And the kind of challenge with this is that as you move forward, and the pictorial representation I added this is almost looking at a dam. You can imagine a dam with water and a single sluice gate, and the water's really bashing up against it, but the amount of data that's coming, it can't handle that. And so the water's gushing over the top. So this is a bit of a problem. So what happens is then the application owners get a little bit frustrated on it. And what this does is this has actually created what we call BYOB. I figured I'd steal another acronym. Bring your own backup. And on the bring your own backup side, you're really looking at it and saying, the application owners are saying, well, okay, so if it's so rigid from a server, from a backup server perspective, I kind of have to move to a modernized platform. And a lot of the application vendors are actually writing their own way to do replication. And as an example of how frustrating it is, I think 2 weeks ago I was in New York and I was chatting to a customer that was actually using Oracle, and they had a backup server that was working with Oracle. And the Oracle administrators have decided to move to a virtualized platform. So they're going from physical to virtual. And they went to the backup admins and said, okay, would you back this stuff up? And the backup admins basically said, no. There's no way, we're not going to do it. It doesn't support it. We're not interested. So if you want to move to a virtual platform, then you're on your own. And so what happens is you get this fragmentation inside of the organization where you have multiple different ways of actually doing backup. So people are actually saying, well, and I think the reason I'm using BYOB is the same as, bring your own devices, BYOD. That was another one where basically IT was disenfranchised and basically run over by the users, and we're seeing roughly the same thing. So we really have to kind of look at it and say, how do we reduce that that stovepipe nature? How do we actually make a much more flexible architecture, as opposed to this accidental architecture where we've now got organizations that have 10 or 20 different ways of backing up systems, and every single one of them has to be relearned, so the cost is high. And that's where you get this equation of the only way that I can scale based on this is basically, I scale, but my complexity goes up and my cost goes up, and that equation is completely wrong. We need to sort of reverse that. So here's the same sort of picture. This is a disk-centric world. Purpose-built backup still has to go along, as like we said, cheap and deep. You need that. But we really want to have a look and say, let's have a crack at the backup server. And that's the piece that we're really talking about today, which is how do we step forward into a modernized world. So mission number 2, and this is really the route that we've been maniacally on, I think, for probably the last year, and the announcements we have today takes us a much more major step towards this. If we do this, if we can get rid of the server, which we've done to some extent, if you're aware of our technologies, DD Boosters is a good functionality on this, and also Avamar, the way in which it works, where you usurp the storage or the storage system for the backup, and you actually move straight to the purpose-built backup, then that does it. Actually, tape, the more you move towards disk, actually, it negates the use of the server as well. So you just kind of have to tip that balance a little bit further and say, well, okay, so you've got your backup management console. Is it possible that you could take the backup management console and then disperse it into the applications on the left-hand side? So in other words, back to the application users. And what this does is it does a lot of functionality. So this moves and enables you to get to backup as a service. This actually gets you to the point where you can do self-service. This actually gets you to the point that your Oracle administrators or your SAP guys can do their backup. They can do it themselves. Now you still need oversight, but you're actually removing yourself as being a bottleneck, and now you're open to it. And I think it's kind of important. It's also important when you look at the feeder streams. So we talk a lot about replication. And you look at things like snapshots, or you look at change block tracking or block change tracking. It doesn't matter what the term is. There's loads of these around, and they're basically where an application vendor or an infrastructure vendor or a primary storage vendor has decided their flavor of replication. And so the question is, why the hell wouldn't you take advantage of that? Can you do that rather than fixing your own static policies? Actually embrace it as an open environment and then basically execute it, so then you get rid of this bottleneck. Because I actually truly believe that, like I said before, is when we see the market and we see backup, and I think of backup being the long pole to IT innovation, I'm kind of worried about it. I'm worried at the fact that if you can only get a certain amount of backup through and the backup window becomes so big, or in essence the amount that you have to do inside that window is so big that you can't back everything up in a single plane, then how do you get to big data? How do you get to the big analytics? How do you get to all of your data being on a single Oracle database? You can't get there, so you really have to modernize the way you're going to do it. Otherwise you end up with an environment where you get BYOB. People bring their own backups, and then you have fragmentation, and then you have cost, and you have to live with it. So what's kind of cool is if you get to that, which is basically empowering the user and actually driving a lot of the administration and execution into the fabric and actually into the infrastructure, you move from being backup as a service. It actually then opens up the avenues to go towards protection as a service. What we saw when we did the tape replacement, once you go from tape to disk, some really interesting things happened. It spawned the industry around PBBA, purpose-built backup appliance market, but you also enabled truly to do things like incrementals that you could never do before. So bandwidth went down, the execution went up, the SLAs went up. So there was a lot of value that really on the surface we didn't see that was there, but basically you execute against it and it spawns a new industry. Kind of iPads come out, and then suddenly there's this whole new market of applications. Same thing happened with PBA, not quite as exorbitant, and I don't have a little cool thing, but the reality is the same, right? So in other words, there's lots of efficiencies. So if we get ourselves to backup as a service, once you've then removed this bottleneck, you can then move towards a protection infrastructure, and you actually then have data protection as a service. Because now you're really at a point where you don't have the bounds. So you actually have a centralized catalog, you have analytics, you can hook back into the front end, you have self-service, and you can actually now link backup, archive, and data protection, all in one contiguous architecture that allows you to sort of step forward to the future. So if I kind of look at it, you say, well, okay, so in the pieces of the puzzle is basically data management, data sources, and protection storage. It's not about one piece of the puzzle, right? So you can't solve it with one piece. We've proved that. We've actually eminently been successful around the PBBA side. We own 60+% of that market share, but you can't change the way in which it's happening unless you have cohesion against all of the pieces. And that's really these three bits, which is basically how do you manage the data, the sources themselves having an acute relationship with them, and then also the protection storage. And so the 3 points you then look at is on the integration on applications is the 3 areas. 1 is natively with the applications, 2 is on the primary storage, and 3 is actually into the virtual infrastructure, because those are all the areas that you bind and understand and communicate with the data. And then obviously consolidation of backup, DR, and archive, and then having a tight integration with the protection storage at the back end. So that's kind of where you want to get to. That's the visionary piece. And then what that'll do is if you get it right, you then basically can drive scale, but you'll also drive cost and complexity down, which is the right formula. That's kind of where people want to go to. So the cool thing is, and that means I've been waffling for a bit, and I am going to hand over to Stephen in a second, is that each of these areas we kind of check the box. So for today, again, we've talked about the PPBA. So cheap and deeper back end, you basically scale. So we've got a hell of a lot more scale coming into the systems, extremely modernized. We're already, very aggressive in that market space, and I think it will only prove better. On the integration of applications with native primary and virtual infrastructures, we'll talk through that, which is on the data protection suite of how we're executing, both on things like VMware, but also closer relationships with platforms such as Isilon, and then we'll also talk on the native side of how we got closer relationships on the applications with things like SAP and Oracle. So each of these, stages we go across. Consolidation of DR and archive. Again, we've done some tremendous work across on the data domain side, and you'll see what we've done for the protection storage and how we've executed against that, and how we handle files across it. And then on the DR side, we've got some really neat technology that we're bringing in to basically do instant restores of things like virtual images. So that's kind of cool. So again, some interesting stuff. And then on the integration on the primary storage, we have to get closer to that. The vision moving forward is you kind of think of it as being DR, backup and archive, or protection as being integral to the storage systems. It needs to flow into the infrastructure as opposed to standing out on its own. And so I think it's kind of critical. And I think the last thing I would kind of say, and I'm sure I'll probably repeat myself because I'll forget about it before the end of the presentation, is that where we're unique is that, we've been very good at one piece of the puzzle. In fact, we've actually, to David's point, we've acquired technologies in each of the pieces of the puzzle, and we're bringing them together in this sort of cohesive fashion. And there's only an organization as such of size of EMC is capable of doing this. To give you a rough idea, our R&D spend just on backup and recovery services is roughly the revenue of our nearest software competitor. So that's kind of the investment that you have to put in, because what's unique about this is you need to keep the organizations that you're working with going forward. So for instance, we have fabulous products, which is Avamar and Networker. We have things like DPA, we have data domain, and you need to satisfy the existing customers. There's always going to be a long curve on the back of that. We also need to support tape. Tape is not going to go away completely. As much as we'd love it to, there's always going to be tape. So we have to support that, and we have to support it out of heterogeneous environments. But then you need this massive force to actually keep up with currency on the application side. So that takes work. And then shifting to this new model. So it's good that we have the investment we have, because you really have to hit each of the 3 tenets at once to execute against this vision. Otherwise, you're never going to get there. It'll be pieces, and then you end up with a BYOB. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Manley. Mr. Manley.
All right, so thank you very much. Now, the first thing I lead with is you heard from the president of the largest data protection vendor in the world. Backup is fundamentally totally broken. And so now it's my job to tell you how we fix it. Piece of cake. Now, when you're that broken and you're slowing down business and you're slowing down IT, well, that kind of breakage isn't just an incremental problem. It's a fundamental architectural flaw. And when you think of traditional backup architectures, 2 words come to mind: closed and monolithic. So for example, how do you store backup data in a traditional backup application? In a closed proprietary format. You can only get to your data through the backup application that made it. What does a backup application track? What kind of protection? Only the things that it created. If a DBA or a storage administrator creates something, too bad, it doesn't exist. How about if I want to take advantage of some new innovation that my DBA has seen in Oracle, or something that's come in the VMAX, or something that's come in VMware? Well, the answer is you wait, and you wait, and you wait, until your backup application puts it on as sort of a bolt-on feature onto its traditional monolithic architecture. Okay, but I'm an app admin. I'd at least like to be able to see what backups you have, that I could do something with. Sorry, it's closed off to you. The only people that can look at those backups are the teams that actually manage the backup application. It's closed and it's monolithic. So if you're going to solve the backup problem, you've got to come up with a new architecture. And that architecture should really be open and modular. And that's where we bring out the protection storage architecture. Now, three pieces comprise this. First, the anchor protection storage. The data source integration, again, this is working with the hypervisor, the application, the primary storage, the things that own that primary copy of the data. And then the data management services to really tie everything together. So if you think of protection storage, think of two key things. First, it's got to work with everything. You don't want islands of storage. And second, it's got to be able to store data in native open formats. If you're going to get away from closed and proprietary, you've got to store data as it is. VMs as VMs, applications as applications, files as files. Now on the data source, this is where, what causes the accidental architecture? What's the source of the frustration? Well, it's that backup isn't fast enough, and it doesn't give visibility to the application owners and end users. Well, that's what the data source integration is about. Because the data sources own the data, they can dramatically optimize backup and recovery performance because they know exactly what's happening in the data set. And in terms of user interfaces, more and more applications, hypervisors, primary storage arrays give you interfaces to see into the protection. If only the backup team and its technology would let you have visibility. They've got a user interface that they want to use. You just have to share the information. And then the data management services. This is really where the backup team needs to focus on adding its value. It's where you need to be able to look across the entire environment so you can run recoveries of whatever data needs to be recovered, so you can ensure compliance for policies or for regulations. But the only way you can do that is if you have visibility across the entire environment. Not just the set of backups that you create, but all of the protection copies, no matter where they're stored, no matter who creates them, and no matter whether we're talking about snapshots or replicas or next generation backups or traditional backups or archives. Everything has to be treated as a first-class citizen. Now the key thing in this architecture, again, it's open standards, open formats, and it's modular. I can plug in with the data sources and work with everything as a first-class citizen. So this is how we get to where we need to go. Now, the question you ask is, all right, we've done a lot of theory, and we've talked a lot about where we're going. Let's get into the meat. What are the announcements today? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover these in the context of the products. So data domain, Avamar, Networker. But the way we build it, our North Star, is this data protection architecture. And so I'm going to reflect those changes within this architecture. So let's start with that anchor piece, the protection storage. So, Guy already talked about the new mid-range system, significantly faster and more scalable. It's really critical that you stay on the performance and capacity curve because for so many years, data protection did not keep up with data growth. So we have to run significantly faster just to catch up. Now, one of the key things in the data domain architecture is it's always been performance grows based on CPU. Unlike a traditional storage system, which grows based on IOPS, so I need flash and I need lots of spindles, I put in the faster Sandy Bridge processor, I light up the cores, I'm going 4 times faster. We continue to scale with CPU. And on the scalability, well, it's easy just to put in more disk drives, larger disk drives, 3 terabyte drives really helping drive the cost down. But this is the storage of last resort. I don't want to put all my eggs in a basket and then see the data get lost because there's nothing behind it. And that's why the data domain system from the ground up was built with the data invulnerability architecture. I'm going to make sure that the data that you put in is the data that you get out. And that's how we can enable the kind of scale that nobody else in the marketplace can match, because you know that your data is going to be safe. And as Guy said, this really fills in our portfolio. You know, we're the largest in terms of channel sales on the DD16620 units. We have the biggest, best, fastest, smartest, strongest protection storage appliance on the high end, and this really does refresh in the mid-range. But this data domain release, it's not just about new hardware platforms. It's also about software. Because when we're talking about protection, right, if I were to take that protection storage box in the architecture and blow it up, it would look something like this. Again, it's a bit about the ability to span all sorts of data sets, but it's also to handle the different workflows. And we talk a lot about backup, but archive. The data domain system now supports over 20 of the largest archive vendors in the world. Supports all sorts of archival data, and for quite a while now has supported compliant archive. So think of that as your SEC 17A4 type of compliance. But going beyond archive, it's also about disaster recovery. Now traditionally, 90+% of data domain customers have replicated their backups off-site to make sure they're recoverable. But when it comes time to, again, I lose that VM, it can take a long time to do a full recovery. Wouldn't it be nice if you could actually spin up the backup copy and use that for disaster recovery? We're going to cover that in more detail later at the end as we do a demonstration of just that. So that's about the protection storage and trying to bring it together into unified protection storage, not just the scale and performance and streaming throughput, but handling the new workloads. Now I want to stay on data domain, but we're going to shift towards the data source integration. One of the most popular use cases that we've had is allowing database administrators to back up their data directly into a data domain. So think of this as your Oracle, your MS SQL DBA running a backup into the data domain, so getting their own space, and having the backup team be able to report and manage across that. Again, really that open modular architecture. DBAs run the backups, not Network or Avamar, but we still get reporting and visibility across it. Well, that's been so popular that one of the key requests we get is, we want it for more databases. So again, when you start to look at big data, protection becomes a real issue. So SAP HANA. So for those SAP HANA administrators, they can use Studio to drive backups directly into the data domain via NFS and get all the value of managing the backups themselves within this protection infrastructure. But we didn't just stop with HANA. How about Oracle Exadata as well? The first deduplication appliance certified for Oracle Exadata backups. And for good measure, if you're an SAP administrator and you're using BR tools and you're built on top of Oracle, wouldn't it be nice to be able to use BR tools to run your own SAP backups directly into the data domain as well? So when we talk data source integration and working with applications, we're talking about all of the applications, and really, again, plugging in with an open modular architecture. Now, that really closes out what I wanted to mention about the data domain releases. So I want to shift now into the protection suite, specifically Avamar 7 Networker 8.1. So I'm going to start with Avamar, and I want to stay on the data source integration though. So again, we covered protection storage and data source integration with applications. How about VMware? Avamar has absolutely made its name in the VM space. The core product inside of VMware's own backup product, the vSphere Data Protection product. Well, one of the key things we've done in this release is, the backup teams and the DBAs said, we love this. DBAs can drive their own backup and manage it into the backup infrastructure so much. Wouldn't it be great if we could do that with VMs as well? And the answer is, yeah, you're right, it would be great. So we built Avamar Control into a native vSphere web client. That means that VM admins, without having to go learn a backup application, can leverage Avamar to protect their virtual infrastructure. So like I said, now you don't have to BYOB. You're not bringing your own backup. You're just getting the backup experience in the user interface that you prefer. Again, the modularization, being able to plug that functionality into VMware. Talked a little bit about instant access. We're going to again talk about that more, so it's a teaser for what you're going to see later. And this policy piece is absolutely fascinating, and that's also to whet your appetite because I'm going to cover that at the end. So we've talked now about application integration. We've talked about hypervisor integration. What about primary storage? Now, one of the most closed off, isolated parts in the protection industry is the NAS space. The standard answer in the NAS industry for the last 5+ years is, how do you protect a NAS box? You buy a second one from the exact same vendor, the proprietary software that connects them, and you're locked in. That is not an acceptable answer. The right way to do any sort of data protection, open modular architectures. A key protocol in this space is the NDMP protocol, and I'll admit, I love NDMP. And one of the key things we've got is in the Avamar portfolio, in our portfolio with the Avamar product, we have the biggest investment in NDMP, the fastest NDMP backups in the market. Now in the portfolio, as David showed, Isilon is the world's leader in scale-out NAS storage. Nowhere is, frankly, NAS backup more important than in those scale-out environments. We've brought those two products together so that you can get the fastest backup performance in a NAS environment in an open and heterogeneous manner with a combination of Avamar and Isilon. And this was a really key step for us, because this was a choice, this is a spot where we could have done a very specific, it only works with Avamar, deeply tied technology. We chose not to. We chose to use NDMP, which means that any other backup vendor, should they choose to invest, can leverage and build these same optimizations. They have not done so to this day, but it is absolutely open and available. Similarly, any other NAS vendor that wants the optimizations that we've done with Isilon is welcome to step up, and we are happy to work with them to open up the environment. A commitment to openness and modular architectures translates what you can do in the NAS environment from a complete proprietary vendor lock-in solution to something open and scalable. So now we've covered the data source integration part. So applications, hypervisor, primary storage. Now I want to stay with Avamar for one more minute, but we're going to move up to the data management services. Now when I think of data management services, I really think of it as 4 key pieces. It's the protection, storage, infrastructure management. Someone's got to manage the networks and the storage and everything. It's the cataloging, tracking where all your data is. It's the single pane of glass to have visibility and management across. And it's the ability to drive things via policy, to make sure you meet your SLAs and your policy. So let's start with Avamar and the protection, storage, infrastructure management. One of the things that I'm absolutely pleased to announce is that all data center workloads on Avamar can now target the data domain. So this has been a journey we've been on now for the last 3 years, starting with VM and Microsoft and Oracle, then with more databases and Hyper-V, now file systems and NDMP NAS. It means that if you choose in your data center, you can have one type of consolidated protection storage that spans across all of your data center workloads, really simplifying the management of the environment. So this closes off what I wanted to talk about on Avamar. Now I want to stay on data management services with the Networker 8.1 release. Networker 8.1 very much focused on those data management services. So we're going to stay on the protection, storage, infrastructure management. Now, one of the things that you find in any enterprise backup environment is that in a lot of cases, they use Fibre Channel as their backup network. And historically, if you've chosen Fibre Channel as your backup network, you've had to use VTL, which really limits the amount of functionality you can get and the performance you can get. Well, in this case, we're now able to announce that you can now, in a networker environment, run the DD Boost technology, which optimizes backup and recovery performance over Fibre Channel as well as Ethernet. We also announced that you're able to do significantly fewer full backups in a networker data domain environment because of the support for virtual synthetics. Again, the real key here is, again, the openness, that I don't care which wire you're running over, whether it's a Fibre Channel wire or an Ethernet wire, we are going to support you and enable you to plug in so that we can integrate into the environment you have and help you evolve as you need to evolve. So really simplifying that protection, storage, infrastructure. Now, let's shift up to the cataloging. Now, one of the things I mentioned is, in a catalog environment, you have to treat all versions as first-class citizens, not just the backups that are created in your own proprietary format. Now, obviously, one of the key things in this space, snapshots and replicas. Now, I'll say, in Networker, for a number of years, I talked about those monolithic architectures and new features look like bolt-ons. Snapshot support in Networker for a number of years looked like a bolt-on. I'm really, really pleased to announce that snapshot management, because we've modularized the Networker architecture, snapshot management is now integrated into Networker. No longer a separate bolt-on. You get to manage it with standard policies. It's part of the standard recovery workflows. It is integrated in. The ability of a modular architecture to adopt and support new technologies. But it's not just snapshots that are backups that are created differently than the backup admin. We talked earlier, DBAs like to run their own backups. So one of the things we've added in this release, a DBA can run a backup through, say, Oracle Recovery Manager, RMAN. Networker can detect that backup, add it to its catalog. Then when it drives that catalog, it may then say, I'd like to be able to store that for a little longer time than the DBA was planning to. Networker can then clone it into its environment and manage it from there. Now the nice part is, as Networker does that clone, it goes and updates the Oracle catalog. Interoperability between both. Openness, open architecture lets you plug in the app admin directly with what the protection team is doing. Treating all protection copies as first-class citizens, not just the ones we create. So now let's move up the stack to that single pane of glass. One of the questions we get very often is, well, you know, you've got Avamar, you've got Networker, which one do I use? How is that playing out? So one way to look at this announcement is we've added all the support for Avamar VM backups, the industry's leading VM backup solution, into Networker. Doesn't mean that Networker customer is suddenly deploying Avamar. They're not managing Avamar. It's built into Networker. It's native. But of course, this is really a sign of bigger things. What we've done is we've modularized the support for VMware that was in Avamar. And because we've been modularizing our architecture, you can put that module directly into Networker and manage it as if it's native. And this is a sign of what we've been working on for the past few years. Avamar last year added tape support. That was the modularization of the Networker tape support added to Avamar. This is the latest, strongest proof that we're bringing together our backup applications, Networker and Avamar, into a unified whole. Another giant leap in that direction. And then that leaves us with the policy management, which I teased earlier. So a lot of our customers are faced with one of two challenges. Either one, I'm backing up 1,200 VMs. Unfortunately, I just found out that we have 2,200. People are creating VMs without setting up protection policies for them. Or the alternate is I set up rigid internal policies that say the only way you can create a new VM is if you go through all these steps with the backup team, which could frankly delay your deployment time from 48, 72 hours or more, slowing down the speed of business. What we've done is we've said you got to start taking the humans out of the equation when you get to virtualization scale. So you can set up a policy now such that when you create a new VM, it automatically gets protected with the baseline policy. No more, I created a VM, I hope it's protected. You know it's protected. Now you can call and change the policy, adjust the policy, but by default you know you're always protected. So we talk in the slide about simplified backup assignment. That's the easy part. The interesting part is it's simplified, reliable VM deployment, because you know you're always safe. And that's what comes when you have, again, a flexible open architecture where you can support policies and work with the VM team. So really tying everything together back to this protection storage architecture. What we've done in this release is we've launched the next generation of protection storage. Not just bigger, faster, purpose-built backup appliances, but unified protection storage that can span from backup to archive to disaster recovery. We've talked about the deeper data source integration we have with big data applications like SAP HANA, Oracle Exadata, integration with big data NAS systems like Isilon, and deeper integration with VMware. And then from a services perspective, really, again, opening up the architecture so that we can work with snapshots, so we can work with Oracle-driven DBA backups, bringing together the Avamar and Networker products, and really starting to create a policy engine that helps you scale your management. So backup is broken, and it really is slowing down business. The way to solve it isn't just to keep working around the edges. You need to adopt a new architecture. Now the win in this, the fact that this is modular, one of the big wins is, but it's not a classic IT rip and replace clean sheet of paper. This is one where you can deploy elements of the architecture piece by piece, either putting all the protection storage in place or going after particular applications, Oracle, VMware, NAS, solving those and evolving as you go. but you need to shift from that traditional backup flawed architecture, which is closed and monolithic, to something that is open and modular. It's the only way your protection environment's going to scale. So with that, I'd like to welcome up on stage Jeremy Lawrence from Eclipse Aerospace.
Thanks very much, Steve.
So Jeremy, first question, I guess, what is Eclipse Aerospace? Walk me through what the company is and what it does.
Eclipse Aerospace manufactures the Eclipse 550. It's the world's first very light jet. It's a 5-seater, single-pilot, twin-engine jet. Flies in the stratosphere at 41,000 feet, and it comes from a design from a bankrupt company. We purchased the assets of Eclipse Aviation, which was a casualty of the economic collapse, and we're starting to make aircraft again.
Oh, that's really cool, and so sounds like it was a bit of a it's a bit of a turnaround effort, though.
It was very much a turnaround operation. Taking those assets, my responsibility was to secure that intellectual property. The former company had done a fantastic job, actually manufactured 260 aircraft. It was a totally unique design in aviation, and that was what was at stake. But there was that IT infrastructure that was the best of everything from many years ago, and this was an opportunity to do something new with it.
So you go into this environment, obviously, it seems like priorities are going to be important, money's going to be a little bit tight. How do you convince them that IT is going to be a key part of their mission then, I guess?
That was relatively easy in this case because what we purchased was the intellectual property and the design data, the tooling, and the history as well. But we weren't in manufacturing. What we're doing right now is really, it's tomorrow in manufacturing terms. We're getting right to business, even though it's been a span of a couple of years. So securing that data initially was a pretty easy sell for me.
Right. So then, but like you said, you're walking into an environment that had the best of everything from a very long time ago. Mm-hmm. How do you sort of what do you prioritize? How do you figure out what to tackle first?
For us, we had numerous vendors inside that data center, and I had to reduce the complexity. It didn't come with operating instructions. It didn't come with a full staff. Right. We had to figure out very quickly how I could reduce the complexity, and I brought myself down to as few vendors as possible. We got ourselves a vBlock, an Avamar disk backup system. I had several tape libraries that I was looking at, and most people, I think, rationally would have turned and run from that, but I saw an opportunity that we could drop right into 2013 with a totally unique way and eliminate tape and also eliminate a lot of the complexity.
So then, again, it's a turnaround company. You're trying to do all this rip in place. From a staffing perspective, I guess, how did the team respond? Did they go running for the hills, or what's their response?
Well, I had one frightened-looking temp, the first day, and he held on for a couple of weeks, and I hired him, and actually attracting the staff has been relatively easy. They've grown into it. It's exciting technology and something we can do with a very small team. I have 2 system administrators, application specialists in SAP, application specialists in the product lifecycle management, and but from an infrastructure perspective, we're getting quite a lot done, and very complex workloads, not thousands of VMs, but really complex workloads and interoperability. It is one application, which is to make airplanes. Right. So the interoperability of those things. Retaining the staff and attracting them has been relatively easy with the technology.
That's very cool. So like you said, the turnaround's working. You're in manufacturing. The future is now.
The complexity of swapping out that old architecture while the company was still running, we accomplished, and now the next task for us is to keep that a steady state and make aircraft. So I can demonstrate actually.
That would be great.
What that's. The laboratory environment that I set up for this. Now, what we're looking at here is the calendar view in the Avamar administrator, which is a bit of a change. And this is kind of a subtle thing, but it matters a lot to my backup administrators because most people are used to looking at nested hierarchical trees and tabular information that's, it's 2 in the morning and you need that app right then. Pointing at the day and then choosing the particular data set was kind of a big deal for us. Indicating which disks we're going to use, and the new menu item that's turned up, which is instant access, we normally would have just started restoring, hoping that you have that target. But a really short RTO means that you actually have a place to put that. You know, the analogy I like to use is the Cracker Jack puzzle with one missing piece. I know where the backup is. I've got some reliability there. I trust it's going to work, but where do I put it? Sometimes that can actually eat up your RTO because you're managing disk quotas on such a thin, you may have the disk, it may not be the right kind of disk, things like that.
And so just setting up for everybody. So basically we're doing the, all right, you lost some sort of VM server.
Oh, right. My scenario is, you know, SAP is a key application for us. And SAP is fairly solid. You know, BR tools, those are baked in right into Avamar as well. It satisfies my SAP administrators. The basis guys are okay. The backup administrators are okay, and they don't quibble once they get it rolling. But there's a lot of glue applications. SAP doesn't want you to change things, and they always recommend you don't. But the glue applications in between. So I'm going to restore a VM with a helper application.
Excellent.
And configure this backup location and where that will go. And most of these are pre-flight checks to show what's actually going to occur. So there I've got my source, chosen my destination, removed encryption from that, and that is actually going to fire up on the data domain storage rather than the VNX. So I'm actually going to an RTO of right now. Let's get back into vSphere and take a look at that.
So we can literally think of this as we were storing native image VMs on the data domain as your backups through Avamar.
Yes.
And you're now actually bringing the VM directly up off of data domain.
Right there.
No data's moved.
So it's in place. I can power that on where it is. Someone else can be figuring out what are we going to do with it next. So that's powered on. I'm going to RDP into that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of thing you just couldn't do if the data had been a proprietary format, right?
We use a lot of NDMP. So here is my helper app, and I can fire that up, and that's going to actually start off serving the application. So I have a running VM, I've got my helper application going again, and we're in business. Now,
yeah, this is right now running off of a data domain.
So let's get back in here. We're only half done.
Right.
If I need to move that, actually, we'll assume I've got my storage location. The application's going, and I'm going to do a storage vMotion and migrate that. The wizard that takes me through here only actually allows me to use change data store and do a storage vMotion. That's also something that's built into the policies when I'm creating those VMs. And that's actually happened to us. It's more common than you'd expect because they're so easy to make. Well, it's not always, it's a task that you don't come back to. Sometimes you get pulled onto something else and you've got an exposed VM. So I'll choose my data store here after the migration type, and that will give you local. And the review for flight check there, and there we go. That's vMotioning right over. We can go back into the RDP session and see that passes. So we like what we see. That beta evaluation worked out really well for us.
Yeah, and this is a classic example of backup and DR really coming together.
Yep.
That you've been able to solve two birds, one stone, as it were.
Yeah, and the price actually works well for us too. If the cost of a non-functioning airplane manufacturing business, when you're in the business of making planes, if you're not making planes, you're out of business. So
it's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming out. I appreciate your story, and thank you very much for walking us through the demo.
Sure.
Jeremy, thank you very much. That's it, get off. I'm fed up with you now. So we're on the home run. What I wanted to do is just introduce, clicky button, Scott Zal. Where are you? There you are. Scott, Vice President and General Manager of Ingram Micros. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course, I was going to say to you, who are you and what you do? I've just almost given that one away. But tell me a little bit about Ingram.
So Ingram is the world's largest technology distributor. Mm-hmm. We sell IT solutions, mobility products and lifecycle management, as well as logistics services to over 200,000 resellers in over 160 countries globally.
And you've had a relationship with EMC for some time, I understand.
Yes, a little over 7 years.
Okay, and the data protection side, so you had a relationship prior to with Data Domain, was that right?
We did. We were actually one of the first distributors to go to market with Data Domain. It was a wonderful relationship for us, and it was very exciting when EMC acquired Data Domain and integrated them into the data protection solutions portfolio.
And so you picked up that portfolio? Mm-hmm. And on a scale of 1 to exciting, is it an interesting space for you?
Absolutely. It's actually the fastest growing piece of our EMC portfolio right now.
Very cool. And what you've seen today of what we're doing around basically next generation, moving towards the data protection architecture and the protection suite and the new platforms, is this something that you feel will be applicable?
Absolutely. I think it's a very exciting announcement today, from the additions to the Data Domain Suite to what you've done with the Data Protection Solution Suite. In terms of its ability now to interoperate across the multitude of technology trends our partners are trying to solve on behalf of their end users, really gives them an opportunity to build out their solutions portfolio, look at how they're protecting the data, and extend their presence in their end user accounts.
Okay, and when you're being so partner focused, the vPlex, I mean, this technology is obviously going to wrap in very well with that. Is that?
Absolutely.
That'll also help you out a lot.
Absolutely. The ability to go in with a tested, converged infrastructure and a solution set that they can put in their end user environments is critical to their ability to be successful, continuing to migrate their business and expand their presence.
Fantastic. So, Scott, anything I didn't ask?
I think we covered it.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. So I just wanted to wrap up, and this is really on today's announcement. So, well, we've talked about a couple of pieces. Obviously, one is what we're doing around the protection suite, what we're doing around the protection architecture, and moving people to a modernized platform. That was really where the Backup to the Future came from. It was actually, there was a poster in the office, and I've been walking past it and just jarring and thinking, that's actually damn good. Whoever thought of that, whenever it was thought of, it's really important, because if we don't solve the backup, we're not going to really get to that future piece, and we really have to kind of solve that and move forward. The two pieces, obviously, one is on a lot of our bread and butter around the DD platforms. So this is basically the 4 mid-tier platforms, which have fantastic scale, really competitive positioning, and that just continues our steam train of this, faster and faster, bigger, deeper, cheaper storage on that storage last resort. I thought it was important what Stephen was talking about with the DIA, the data and vulnerability architecture. This thing really is built from the ground up to be that storage of last resort, or the capacity optimized storage platform. We take it extremely seriously, that if people basically come off tape and they go to disk, we are that last resort. So even the engineering team thinks about it in such a way as to say there really isn't such a thing as a hardware failure. A hardware failure is the fact that we haven't figured out how to solve it with software. So we work on this. This isn't just a bunch of disks sort of stuck in a system with a nice operating system on top. On the data protection suite, we've talked about that. So basically, you can see the components of it. One of the important things that, again, Stephen sort of mentioned is the fact that we've moved more to a modular architecture or a service-oriented architecture. We've been doing this for the last couple of years. This move is much more aggressive. So this is one big step towards it. And actually, I think we've probably got one more step to complete this, on this journey, so we get a hell of a long way forward. And I think you solve this in 2 different ways. I mean, one is from a technology perspective, and that's something that we've talked about, and the other one is from a business model perspective. So what we've done with the data protection suite is we announced this at EMC World. And actually, we've been shipping this product now, or we've been selling it as a data protection suite, I think, since Q3 of last year. And interesting enough, about 50% of our software purchases now happen across the data protection suite. And it's in a utility model, to such an extent as basically depend on your use case. So you buy into the suite, you can actually flip-flop use cases. So if you move from the Avamar modules to the networker modules using DPA, you buy it on a capacity basis. So it actually provides that flexibility. And the tighter we then bind that, the more cohesive it is and the more streamlined, it just continues to make sense. So we're actually looking now, we're adding sidecars on things like compliance into it. So in other words, across onto the email archiving. So as we move forward, this is going to be a very powerful way in which we want to deliver the overall story, strategy, and architecture. And that leads us basically to this protection storage architecture, which is really the key message. We have to progress. We want you guys to progress. We want the customers to move forward. And we believe that we have the strength, the technology, the innovation, and we're executing like crazy to basically bring this to you. So with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today, and hopefully we can talk a little bit later. Thank you.